When we usually think about global power, we picture this incredibly neat, organized flowchart.
Right, like the version of the world they teach you in high school civics.
Exactly. You have the presidents or, prime ministers at the very top, and that flows down to the cabinet members.
Then the heads of the intelligence agencies, the military generals.
Yeah, and so on.
They look
It's a perfectly engineered machine. You push a button in Washington or London or Moscow, and a lever moves halfway across the world.
It's clean. It's visible. I mean, it makes sense.
But it's comforting too, right?
Oh, absolutely. We like to believe in that structure because it implies that someone, somewhere, is firmly in control of the steering wheel.
Yeah, even if we totally disagree with the person driving.
Exactly. The mere existence of the flowchart means the system itself is rational.
But then, you lift up the floorboards.
Yeah.
You look at the actual wiring of global intelligence, the covert operations, and the freelance fixers who operate entirely in the shadows.
And suddenly that clean flowchart just dissolves.
It completely vanishes. We're looking at a landscape that is tangled, chaotic, and frankly, deeply unsettling.
Which is why today we're jumping straight into that shadow world.
Yes, we are. We've got our hands on an extensive, wide-ranging interview transcript featuring John Kiriakou.
For those who don't know, he's a former CIA spy.
Right. A whistleblower who went to prison.
And someone who has seen both the absolute highest levels of the American intelligence apparatus and, well, the absolute lowest, grimiest levels of the federal prison system.
His perspective is incredibly rare, because he understands the mechanics of state power from the inside out.
Right. And he also understands what happens when that power decides to just completely crush you.
Yeah. And the mission for this deep dive is to use his testimony to map out exactly how intelligence agencies operate behind the scenes.
How they manipulate the media you consume, how they intimidate whistleblowers.
And then we're going to apply that framework to understand a massive historical anomaly.
We're going to examine how an independent, stateless operator, specifically Jeffrey Epstein, managed to privatize these exact same intelligence tactics.
Right. But before we get too deep into the mechanics of all this, I want to establish some ground rules for our discussion.
Yeah, that's really important.
Because the source material we're pulling from today mentions a lot of very famous names.
A lot of them.
It references actions, allegations, and cover-ups that span multiple U.S. administrations.
Yeah.
I mean, we are talking about the Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden eras.
Right. Kiriakou is dropping names across the entire political spectrum.
Exactly. So for you listening, we have to look at this purely as a structural blueprint. We aren't here to validate the politics or take sides on the partisan affiliations mentioned in the transcript.
Not at all. We are strictly here to look at the machinery he's describing.
To impartially unpack the claims and the historical through lines and figure out how these systems of power allegedly function.
That is a crucial distinction. We are analyzing the architecture of power, not the political banners hanging on the building.
Beautifully put. Okay, let's unpack this. If we want to understand how a lone intelligence broker could manipulate powerful people, we first have to understand the playbook he was borrowing from.
Right. We have to look at how state intelligence agencies learn to shape public reality.
And to do that, Kiriakou's transcript takes us all the way back to the very first declassified CIA covert action.
Which drops us right into the middle of the 1949 Italian election.
Yeah. Picture this. Post-World War II, Europe is in absolute shambles.
Economies are devastated. People are starving.
The political landscape is highly unstable. And there is a very real, palpable fear within the U.S. government that Western Europe is going to fall to communism.
Specifically in Italy, the Communist Party was actually polling ahead of the conservative Christian Democratic Party.
And the U.S. decides they absolutely cannot let that happen.
No way. So the newly formed CIA intervenes.
And the mechanics of that intervention are shockingly blunt.
Oh, yeah. They didn't use, sophisticated cyber warfare or subtle diplomatic pressure.
Not at all. According to the historical record Kiriakou cites, the CIA took $150,000 in raw cash.
And funneled it directly to the Christian Democratic Party.
But they didn't just use it to, print campaign posters or buy radio ads.
No, they used that cash to directly bribe Italian journalists.
They literally paid them to write pro-conservative, anti-communist articles in the run-up to the election.
Look at the economics of that for a second. You hear $150,000 today, and in the context of a national election, it sounds like a rounding error.
Right. Like nothing.
But you have to adjust that for inflation back to 1949, and more importantly, you have to consider the specific target.
Yeah.
If you are a journalist living in a war-torn, recovering economy where the currency has basically collapsed,
Yeah.
and you are offered what amounts to months, maybe years of salary just to write a 500-word article slanting a certain way,
I mean, that is an overwhelming, almost insurmountable incentive.
it's pure, direct, cash for copy bribery.
And it worked. The operation swung just enough votes to ensure the conservatives won and the communists were locked out of power.
Exactly.
Now, when I read that, my first thought was, wow, the old days were so wildly corrupt.
Yeah, men in trench coats handing over literal bags of cash.
Exactly. It feels like something out of a noir film. But Kiriakou argues something really counterintuitive here.
He says that the modern version of this media manipulation, what we have today, is actually far more insidious precisely because it doesn't require a single dollar to change hands.
Right. The intelligence apparatus evolved.
They realize that paying journalists directly is risky. It leaves a paper trail, it requires constant funding, and frankly, it's inefficient.
Sure, during the Cold War, you had things like Operation Mockingbird.
Which, for context, was a massive covert campaign where the CIA essentially built a Rolodex of sympathetic journalists across major American media outlets who would push the agency's talking points.
Right. But even Mockingbird required active recruitment and management. Today, the currency isn't cash anymore.
No, the currency is access.
And the transcript gives us this incredible tangible example of what access looks like in practice, involving a journalist named Jason Leopold.
Oh, Leopold. Kiriakou affectionately refers to him as a FOIA terrorist.
Yeah, FOIA standing for the Freedom of Information Act.
Right. Apparently, Leopold is so relentless at filing these government transparency requests that the George W. Bush Pentagon officially internally labeled him with that moniker.
Which is kind of a badge of honor in investigative journalism, if you think about it.
Totally. Leopold understands the bureaucracy better than the bureaucrats do. He knows exactly how to word a request so they can't legally deny it.
And he aggressively sues the absolute moment an agency misses its statutory 60-day response window.
Exactly. So, out of sheer boredom over the Christmas holiday in 2015.
Just casual holiday boredom.
Right. He decides to cast a massive net. He files a FOIA request asking for all communications between the CIA's Public Affairs Office and various prominent national security journalists over a specific time period.
And because of his reputation for suing immediately, the CIA actually complies and hands over the documents.
And what Leopold finds in those emails is staggering.
Unbelievable. He uncovers direct correspondence from Ken Delanian,
who was reporting for the LA Times and later became the chief national security correspondent for NBC News.
Right. The emails showed Delanian actively sending drafts of his articles to the CIA for clearance before he even sent them to his own editors at the newspaper.
Let's pause on that because the mechanics of that are insane.
Yeah, he wasn't just asking for a quote or a fact check.
No, he was literally sending the meat of his journalism to the intelligence agency he's supposed to be covering.
Basically saying, is it okay if I write this about you? Does this frame you in the right light? And if not, I'll kill the story.
It completely subverts the entire concept of an independent press.
What's fascinating here is how Kiriakou contrasts this high-level, cozy collusion with another story about a young, hungry, independent journalist who actually stumbled onto a real, unapproved scoop.
Oh, this story is wild. This indie reporter does what you're supposed to do. He contacts the CIA press office for comment.
Basically saying, I have this information, I'm publishing this tomorrow, do you have a statement?
And the agency's response wasn't a bribe. They didn't offer him a bag of cash to make it go away.
No, it was an outright threat of professional excommunication.
They told him, so help us God, if you publish this, you will never be invited to the Christmas party ever again.
And we will never give you an off-the-record briefing. You are going to be banned from the building.
And the young journalist, terrified of losing his only pipeline to information, killed his own article.
I think the best way to visualize this shift is to compare modern national security reporting to an exclusive VIP nightclub.
Okay, I like that.
In the 1950s, the CIA had to actively recruit and pay people to be on their side. They had to pay the bouncers, they had to buy the patrons drinks.
Right.
Today, they just stand at the door of the VIP room with a clipboard. They don't need to bribe you. They just threaten to unclip the velvet rope and take away your VIP pass.
And if you are a national security reporter in Washington, D.C., losing that pass means you have no sources.
You can't get a background quote. You can't confirm a rumor. Your career stars to death.
And we have to ask why journalists are so vulnerable to this tactic today.
Why does it work so well?
It is a direct result of the financial collapse of modern investigative journalism. Decades ago, massive newsrooms like the Washington Post or the New York Times had deep pockets.
Right. If a reporter needed to spend 2 years digging into a hostile government agency,
Fighting subpoenas, traveling the world to verify a story without relying on official spokespeople.
the paper could afford to back them.
Exactly. But the internet killed the classified ad section, ad revenues plummeted, and those deep investigative budgets vanished.
Today, reporters are under immense, crushing pressure to produce constant daily content for the web. The 24-hour news cycle demands to be fed.
And the only way to produce high-level national security content efficiently, day after day, is to have friendly sources inside the agencies who just hand you the narrative.
You become a stenographer for the state because you literally cannot afford the time or money it takes to be an adversary.
Which really makes you wonder, when you turn on the evening news or scroll through a major paper, how much of the reality you're presented with is shaped entirely by what a reporter chose not to publish.
How many vital stories were quietly deleted just so a correspondent could stay on the invitation list for a background briefing?
It forces us to read between the lines of everything we consume. But this system of soft manipulation trading access for favorable coverage only works if the journalist plays ball.
Right. What happens when the VIP pass analogy isn't enough?
What happens when a journalist or a whistleblower inside the agency decides they don't care about the Christmas party or the background briefings?
They have the truth, and they are going to publish it regardless of the consequences.
That is when the soft gloves come off and the intelligence agencies deploy their heavy artillery.
The bureaucratic weaponization of fear.
Kiriakou outlines how they use a false moral panic to crush dissent.
He highlights a specific dilemma faced by Joby Warwick, who is a 2-time Pulitzer-winning national security reporter for the Washington Post.
Warwick is highly respected, deeply sourced, and not easily intimidated.
But Kiriakou describes the ultimate trump card the agencies play. When Warwick is about to publish a highly sensitive, deeply embarrassing story, he will get a call from the director of the CIA or the NSA, or sometimes even the National Security Advisor.
And they don't threaten his access. They tell him, if you publish this story, X number of people will die.
They put the blood directly on his hands before the ink is even dry.
And Warwick is forced into this impossible, agonizing position. He and his editors literally have to go into a conference room and play a guessing game with human lives.
They have to figure out if the intelligence agency is telling the absolute truth that an undercover asset in a hostile country will be executed if the details leak.
Or if the agency is just throwing darts at a board to protect a bureaucratic failure from public embarrassment.
It is an incredibly dark psychological game, because no moral human being wants to be responsible for the death of innocent people.
The agencies know this, and they exploit that basic human decency.
But, I have to push back here for a second.
Yeah.
Play devil's advocate.
Sure.
On the surface, that sounds like a horrible, cynical manipulation. But isn't it entirely possible that sometimes revealing state secrets actually does put undercover agents or military personnel at catastrophic risk?
Oh, absolutely.
We know covert operations rely on total secrecy. How do we, or how does a journalist, separate the boy who cried wolf from a legitimate life-or-death national security threat?
That tension is exactly what gives the threat its power. Yes, legitimate risks exist. But Kiriakou's testimony provides a glaring, documented example of how this specific threat is routinely manufactured out of thin air as a bluff.
Yeah.
And to illustrate the mechanics of this bluff, he brings up the harrowing case of NSA whistleblower Tom Drake.
The Tom Drake story is infuriating. For context, Drake was a senior executive at the National Security Agency.
Right. He was the one who originally blew the whistle on the fact that the NSA was conducting massive, warrantless surveillance on American citizens in the aftermath of 9/11.
He tried to go through the proper internal channels, the Inspector General, the whole 9 yards.
When the system ignored him, he eventually went to the press.
And the government came down on him with a level of crushing force that is hard to comprehend.
They wanted to make an example of him. They charged Drake with 9 felonies under the Espionage Act.
And let's look at the specific mechanics of those charges, because it reveals how the justice system can be weaponized.
They charged him with multiple counts of theft of government property.
But the property in question wasn't a stolen hard drive or a stack of classified dossiers.
No, the government argued that the classified information he kept in his head, his memory of what the NSA was doing, constituted stolen government property.
They literally charged him with a thought crime. They argued that his brain belonged to the state.
He was facing 55 years in a federal penitentiary.
His career was destroyed, his finances were wiped out defending himself, and the psychological climax of this entire ordeal happened during a proffer meeting at the Department of Justice.
Let's set the scene for what a proffer meeting actually is. It's a formal sit-down between the prosecutors, the defense attorneys, and the defendant.
It's usually held in some sterile, fluorescent-lit conference room at the DOJ.
And the goal of the prosecution in a proffer meeting is to lay out how overwhelmingly strong their case is, terrify the defendant, and force them to accept a plea deal to avoid trial.
It is pure psychological warfare.
So Drake is sitting in this room facing the destruction of his entire life. And the DOJ officials look him dead in the eye and they drop the ultimate trump card.
They accuse him of having the blood of dozens of American soldiers on your hands.
They tell him his leaks got troops killed in Iraq and Afghanistan.
They are trying to break him morally. If they can make him feel responsible for dead soldiers, he might just plead guilty to make the nightmare stop.
But Drake's response is the stuff of legend. He didn't crumble. He didn't apologize.
He looked back across the table at the federal prosecutors and said, Name one single soldier who died because I said the NSA was spying on Americans, and I'll sign a guilty plea right now. Name him."
And the room went silent.
Because they couldn't name a single one.
The government blinked. They had completely fabricated the claim to terrorize him into a confession.
Drake called their bluff, and shortly after that meeting, the entire massive Espionage Act case completely fell apart. All the felony charges were thrown out.
He ended up pleading to a minor misdemeanor of misusing a computer system.
And here's the kicker, the detail that proves the absolute cynicism of the whole thing.
Later, journalists discovered that the government had quietly scrubbed the accusation about him having blood on his hands from the DOJ and NSA websites.
They memory hold their own lie once it was exposed.
It's the ultimate bureaucratic bludgeon. And what Kiriakou points out is that this behavior stems from a culture of profound, almost delusional institutional arrogance.
These agencies operate in the dark for so long, surrounded by yes men and classified stamps, that they develop a built-in assumption that the public, the press, and even high-powered defense attorneys are just too stupid to catch their mistakes.
He gives some wildly embarrassing examples of this hubris.
Yeah, he talks about how the CIA constantly tries to edit Wikipedia articles.
They try to rewrite history, subtly change the narratives around covert coups or agency controversies.
But they are frequently outed by independent watchdogs. Why? Because the CIA operatives assigned to manipulate Wikipedia forget to use basic VPNs or hide their digital tracks.
Right, and the IP addresses on the edits trace right back to the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia.
It's just sloppy.
And Kiriakou experienced this incompetence firsthand during his own legal battle. When the government prosecuted him for blowing the whistle on the CIA's torture program, the prosecution messed up their legal discovery process so badly.
Failing to hand over required unclassified documents to the defense.
Right, they messed up so badly that the judge forced them to drop 3 of the major charges.
Kiriakou notes that his own lawyers initially couldn't believe the government would make such an amateur foundational mistake.
They assumed it was a complex trap, but it wasn't. They were just arrogant and sloppy.
When you hear a politician or an intelligence official on the news tonight cite national security to shut down a debate or refuse a transparency request, you really have to wonder.
Kiriakou is asking us to recognize that while very real, dangerous threats do exist in the world, the phrase national security is frequently used as an impenetrable shield for profound incompetence, illegality, or just bureaucratic embarrassment.
It is an obfuscation tactic designed to make you stop asking questions.
And establishing that baseline is absolutely vital for where we are going next.
Yeah, because we have to understand that information is aggressively manipulated, that access is traded like currency.
And that psychological blackmail and the weaponization of fear are standard operating procedures for the state.
Because that provides the necessary context for the most explosive part of Kiriakou's testimony. We have spent the first part of this deep dive looking at how massive, multi-billion-dollar state agencies operate. Now, we shift to the anomaly.
We shift to what happens when a single, uncredentialed private citizen manages to successfully privatize this exact same model of psychological control and blackmail.
We are talking, of course, about Jeffrey Epstein.
For years, the prevailing theory in the media and among analysts was that Epstein was simply an asset, an employee.
Kiriakou himself mentions that he initially believed Epstein was just a Mossad access agent, a guy whose sole job was to gather compromising dirt on American politicians and funnel it straight back to Israeli intelligence.
It made sense. It fit the traditional flowchart.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. As more documents have emerged, and Kiriakou emphasizes that we have barely scratched the surface, noting there are still an estimated 2.5 to 3 million unreleased documents seized from Epstein's properties.
All right.
The assessment of his true role has dramatically shifted.
Kiriakou now classifies Epstein not as an employee of a single state, but as a highly sophisticated intelligence peddler or an intelligence broker.
To truly understand the danger of that, we need to define the mechanics of peddling.
In the traditional espionage world, a peddler is usually a low-level opportunist. Imagine a bartender or a hotel clerk in a conflict zone, like Beirut or Vienna.
They overhear two operatives talking, or they notice who is sleeping with whom.
They take that tip, they walk into the American embassy, and they sell it for $500.
Then they cross the street to the British embassy and sell the exact same tip.
Then they go to the French, then the Russians.
They hold no allegiance, they just sell information to the highest bidder.
But Epstein took that low-level street corner concept and scaled it up to the absolute apex of global power.
He wasn't eavesdropping on foot soldiers. He was collecting incredibly intimate, highly compromising intelligence on people like Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, Prince Andrew, and the world's leading academics, scientists, and hedge fund managers.
And then he was shopping that leverage.
The transcript reveals the sheer audacity of his network.
Epstein didn't just deal with Mossad. He actively engaged with MI5 and MI6 in the UK. He approached German intelligence.
And perhaps most astonishingly, he relentlessly pursued a one-on-one meeting with Vladimir Putin.
And the mechanics of that Putin request are wild. Epstein refused to meet with Putin if other Russian intelligence officials, like the head of the FSB or the GRU, were in the room.
He demanded it be exclusively one-on-one.
Think about the ego, but also the leverage required to make that demand.
What level of sensitive, world-altering information does a private citizen possess that makes them demand a private audience with a notoriously paranoid head of state, completely bypassing the traditional state intelligence apparatus?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it completely shatters the long-held debate about the nature of his blackmail operation.
For a long time, apologists or certain analysts argued that Epstein's blackmail, the hidden cameras in the bedrooms, the meticulously recorded logs of compromised situations, was fundamentally defensive.
The argument was that he was just a deeply paranoid billionaire gathering insurance to protect his immense wealth from extortion.
But Kiriakou firmly rejects that entirely.
He states that to run an operation of this magnitude, collecting granular intelligence 24 hours a day on the world's most powerful people, outfitting multiple mansions and islands with closed-circuit surveillance.
That is not defensive paranoia. That is an offensive intelligence operation. He was hunting.
And we see bizarre, lingering reflections of the power that operation wielded even today, specifically in the penal system.
Yeah, Kiriakou points out the incredibly strange, almost inexplicable situation regarding Epstein's accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell.
In the Federal Bureau of Prisons, there is a very strict foundational internal rule. Anyone convicted of a sex crime involving a minor cannot, under any circumstances, serve their sentence in a minimum security work camp.
Right. Because of the nature of the crime and the target on their back, they are usually placed in low-security or medium-security prisons to protect them from the general population or to ensure they don't interact with the community.
But they are never put in minimum security camps, which often don't even have locked doors or fences, and where inmates frequently work out in the local town.
Yet, Ghislaine Maxwell is currently the only sex offender in the entire federal prison system placed in a minimum security work camp.
And Kiriakou claims this unprecedented exception was done via a direct presidential transfer. Why?
Furthermore, FOIA records show that between 2000 and 2014, Epstein was actively filing his own FOIA request to the CIA and the National Security Council.
He was seemingly trying to force them into an official admission of their association with him. He was using the state's own transparency laws to taunt them.
Which highlights the unique and terrifying danger of a stateless intelligence broker. If you have a formal, corrupt intelligence officer working for the CIA or MI6, they are still ultimately bound by bureaucracy.
They have budgets, they have oversight committees, they have national interests to consider.
But an independent peddler like Epstein, He answers to absolutely no government oversight. He is a rogue variable. He is entirely unpredictable.
And yet, despite the obvious catastrophic risks of engaging with a rogue operator who records everything, the global elite continue to flock to his homes and fly on his planes. Why?
Because the currency he traded in secrets, illicit access, and the leverage to destroy rivals was too valuable for them to ignore.
They thought they could use him without realizing they were the product being harvested.
This brings up the most baffling question of the entire saga. We live in a world run by heavily vetted leaders. These people are surrounded by security details, secret service, intense background checks, and corporate PR teams.
Right.
How does one uncredentialed guy, a guy who started out as a math teacher in Coney Island, gain enough psychological leverage to rival entire state intelligence apparatuses? How did he actually do it?
To answer that, we have to look past the sensationalism of the parties and the private islands. We have to look at the granular psychological tactics he deployed.
We have to examine the playbook of a predator spy.
Kiriakou provides a chilling anecdote from a victim that perfectly illustrates his methodology.
Yes, this part of the transcript is deeply unsettling. Kiriakou recounts a conversation he had with a former model who was swept up in Epstein's orbit.
She described how Epstein would set her up with incredibly powerful, famous people, CEOs, politicians in Hollywood or New York.
He would arrange a dinner or a meeting. But here's the key detail. Epstein wouldn't attend the meetings himself. He would send her in entirely alone.
And she noted that most of the time, nothing overtly inappropriate would happen at these specific preliminary meetings. It was just a dinner.
But the moment the meeting was over, the second she walked out the door, Epstein's phone would ring. And he would aggressively, relentlessly debrief her.
He demanded every conceivable physical and psychological detail. What did the targets say? What did they order? How much did they drink?
What was their body language when a certain topic was brought up? Did they seem insecure about their wife? Did they look at you a certain way?
And if she said, nothing happened, we just talked, he would push back aggressively, interrogating her, analyzing the interaction to see exactly where the target's vulnerabilities were.
Kiriakou had a sudden, horrifying realization about what he was looking at. He realized Epstein wasn't just a voyeur.
He compared Epstein to Bill Belichick and Tom Brady intensely watching football game tape.
Only Epstein wasn't studying defensive formations or blitz packages. He was studying the psychological weaknesses of global power brokers.
Like a tech company running aggressive, real-world QA quality assurance testing.
Yes. Epstein was sending these young women in to act as human probes. The victims were unknowingly beta testing the psychological vulnerabilities of the world's most powerful people.
And Epstein was sitting back in his townhouse, gathering all the data, figuring out exactly what kind of bait would work on which specific billionaire.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. It was systematic profiling.
Furthermore, the victim noted that his initial approach to her reveals textbook espionage recruitment skills.
When Epstein first met this model, he didn't lead with money or crude propositions.
He wanted to know everything about her. He asked probing questions about her childhood dreams, her family dynamics, her deepest insecurities, her goals for the future.
He used this disarming, slightly goofy, aw shucks, Coney Island accent. He weaponized the concept of active listening.
He manufactured this intense, artificial empathy.
He made these targets feel like they were the most fascinating, important people in the world, building absolute, unshakable trust.
And once those boundaries were completely dismantled, he exploited them.
And Kiriakou points out that these are the exact traits required of a top-tier CIA espionage recruiter.
A successful case officer doesn't recruit a foreign asset by walking up and offering them a bag of cash or threatening to shoot them.
That breeds resentment and double agents.
The CIA prefers to recruit people based on a cultivated, friendly relationship. They get the asset to act out of a sense of trusted friendship, ideological alignment, or carefully managed financial need, rather than crude blackmail.
Epstein understood this mechanism deeply. He knew that true, lasting leverage doesn't just come from snapping a compromising photograph.
True leverage comes from identifying a target's deepest psychological and emotional vulnerabilities and making yourself the sole provider of whatever it is they desperately need.
It's a really dark realization for us as social creatures. Charisma, active listening, showing an intense, genuine seeming interest in someone's hopes and dreams. These are traits we naturally value.
We look for them in our friends, our mentors, our romantic partners.
But in the hands of a trained intelligence peddler, those exact same traits are weaponized tools of extraction. They're lockpicks for the human mind.
But wait, psychological profiling at this elite international level isn't something you just pick up working a desk at Bear Stearns.
Right, you don't just wake up one morning knowing how to systematically compromise a prime minister. Where did he actually learn the mechanics of global espionage?
That is the million-dollar question, and it takes us straight into the geopolitical chaos of the 1980s.
To understand Epstein, we have to follow the money. And more importantly, we have to follow the weapons.
The source material points directly to Epstein's early association with some of the most notorious arms dealers and international fixers on the planet.
Specifically, Kiriakou introduces us to Adnan Khashoggi. If you don't know the name, Khashoggi was a Saudi arms dealer who was known globally as Mr. 10% because of the massive cut he took from brokering geopolitical arms deals.
He was a man of staggering, almost comical wealth.
And Khashoggi wasn't just a salesman. He was a central, indispensable fixer in massive state-sponsored covert operations.
Most notably, he was a key figure in the Iran-Contra affair.
For a quick historical refresher, Iran-Contra was a massive scandal where the U.S. government illegally sold weapons to Iran, who was subject to an arms embargo, and then used the secret profits to fund the Contra rebel groups in Nicaragua.
Khashoggi was the guy helping to move those illegal funds through his own shadowy bank accounts in Cyprus, funneling them to accounts controlled by U.S. operative Oliver North.
Khashoggi, who, as a bizarre historical footnote, was also the maternal uncle of Dodi Fayed, the man who died in the car crash alongside Princess Diana, was a man who existed entirely above the law.
The source describes him as a guy who hosted clandestine meetings of warring factions. He would have the Russians and the Dagestanis negotiating at his private estates in Nice and Monte Carlo.
He would work with anyone who could pay. The Americans, the Israelis, the Libyans. Ideology didn't matter. Only leverage and money mattered.
Alongside Khashoggi, Kiriakou notes that Epstein was also closely associated with a British fixer and arms dealer named Douglas Leese.
These relationships were forming right as Epstein was leaving his short stint on Wall Street.
And crucially, this era coincides with one of the largest, most secretive, and most corrupt financial transactions in modern history, the Al-Yama deal.
Okay, let's really dig into the mechanics of Al-Yama, because this is where the scale of the money gets difficult to comprehend.
This was a multi-decade arms agreement between the United Kingdom and Saudi Arabia.
The UK government, primarily through the defense contractor BAE Systems, provided massive amounts of fighter jets, helicopters, and military infrastructure to the Saudis.
But the Saudis didn't pay for it with a check. They paid for it in oil. Specifically, up to 600,000 barrels of crude oil a day for years.
And when you are trading fighter jets for millions of barrels of oil off the books, it generates billions and billions of dollars in untraceable wealth and slush funds.
This money was used to bribe Saudi royals, pay off middlemen, and fund covert operations globally. It was a dark money engine.
And Kiriakou notes that Prince Andrew, during his decade serving as a UK trade envoy, has been repeatedly accused of covering up or refusing to share information regarding Epstein's specific granular involvement in managing the fallout or the finances of this exact deal.
This raises an important question.
Yeah. What could a relatively green Wall Street guy possibly contribute to a multi-billion-dollar Saudi-UK fighter jet deal?
It makes absolutely no sense on paper. You have the heads of state, the biggest defense contractors in the world, the intelligence chiefs, and then Jeffrey Epstein from Coney Island.
To understand his value, you have to look at the intersection of high finance, money laundering, and intelligence.
Khashoggi and Leese knew how to move weapons, but as the global financial system became more digitized and complex in the 80s, they needed people who understood the esoteric plumbing of American financial regulations, offshore tax loopholes, and shell company structures.
Epstein wasn't advising on the aerodynamics of a fighter jet. He was advising on how to wash the slush funds.
He was the financial architect for the dark money.
And we know he was deeply embedded in this world because by the early 1980s, his travel records show him moving through countries directly related to these Saudi deals at the exact right times.
And crucially, Kiriakou, speaking as a former CIA officer trained in document forgery, points out that Epstein was traveling internationally with a remarkably high-quality fake passport.
A passport so good that Kiriakou believes it absolutely had to be manufactured and provided by a state intelligence service.
So the implication here is profound. Epstein was apprenticing under guys like Khashoggi.
He was watching how the plumbing of the global shadow economy actually worked. He was learning how off-the-books money was moved through Cyprus and the Cayman Islands.
He was learning how to compromise targets at high society parties to ensure business deals went through.
Most importantly, He learned the golden rule of the international fixer. Khashoggi taught him that if you are a citizen of nowhere, but you are immensely useful to everyone,
If you hold the secrets for the U.S., the money for Israel, the back channels for the Saudis and the U.K.
you become too valuable for any single country to ever arrest. You achieve a bizarre kind of geopolitical immunity.
Precisely. Epstein took that model, which Khashoggi built on arms dealing and financial fraud, and he evolved it.
He applied that exact same architecture of immunity to sexual blackmail and human trafficking. He forged his operational blueprint in the geopolitical chaos of the 1980s arms trade.
Which brings us, inevitably, to the final act of this story.
We have established his incredible tower, his deep mastery of psychological manipulation, his ties to state intelligence, and his apprenticeship under global arms dealers. He built a fortress of blackmail.
And yet, the man who supposedly knew all the secrets of the world is finally caught. He is placed in a federal holding cell in Manhattan, and he dies before he can testify or release his leverage.
And this leaves us with the ultimate cultural debate of the decade. Was Jeffrey Epstein taken out by the massive shadow system he peddled to, or did a structurally broken, catastrophically incompetent system simply let him die?
It is the defining Rorschach test of our time. And to unpack this, the transcript relies heavily on Kiriakou's own first-hand harrowing experiences serving time in the Federal Bureau of Prisons.
When Kiriakou blew the whistle on the CIA torture program, he was sentenced to 30 months in federal prison. His testimony provides a very compelling, grounded argument for the systemic incompetence theory.
It really does, because when you and I are sitting at home and we hear the news report that the cameras outside Epstein's cell were mysteriously broken, the guards were supposedly asleep at their desks, and his cellmate was conveniently transferred out the day before.
Our brains immediately scream, "Conspiracy! It's an assassination! It's too perfect!"
But Kiriakou argues that we are projecting an assumption of competence onto a system that is fundamentally, foundationally chaotic.
We assume the prison system operates like a casino vault. But Kiriakou describes a prison environment that is shockingly, almost comically inept.
He claims that at the time he was incarcerated, the only requirement to be a guard in the federal system was working toward a GED and having no prior felony convictions.
These are not highly trained tactical operators.
He describes situations where guards literally could not read the names on the envelopes during mail call.
The guards would just hand the stack of mail to the prisoners and force the inmates to conduct their own mail distribution, which is a massive violation of basic security rules regarding contraband and privacy.
And regarding the famous broken cameras, Kiriakou says that inside the facilities, the cameras are always broken.
When he worked a prison job as a janitor in the chapel, he constantly had to break up illicit encounters or drug deals between inmates. Why did they do it in the chapel?
Because every prisoner in the facility knew that the cameras in the chapel hadn't functioned in years.
Furthermore, he notes that many camera systems in these aging federal buildings often still use physical VHS or digital tape loops that automatically reset and record over themselves every single night.
Which perfectly explains the so-called glitch in the Epstein footage. It wasn't necessarily a CIA hacker erasing the hard drive. It was a 1990s tape deck doing what it does every 24 hours because the Bureau of Prisons didn't have the budget or the competence to upgrade their servers.
Exactly. And then there is the issue of the guards sleeping. In a special housing unit, guards are legally mandated to do physical rounds every 15 minutes, or every 8 minutes for an inmate on suicide watch.
But Kiriakou claims they routinely, universally ignore this. They are understaffed, they are working double shifts, so they sleep, they surf the internet, or they just ignore their duties entirely.
So when it took them hours to check on Epstein, to a guy like Kiriakou who lived in that system, that wasn't a coordinated stand-down order from the deep state. That was just a normal Tuesday night in a federal prison.
To really drive home just how wildly chaotic and lawless the inside of these facilities really is, Kiriakou tells a genuinely horrifying story about a fellow inmate he knew named Truck.
Truck was a massive, intimidating, convicted serial killer who was doing 40 years. And Truck harbored an intense, violent hatred for pedophiles, who made up a surprisingly large portion of the specific low-security prison population.
Now, there are strict written rules in the prison to keep these populations apart and prevent violence. No pedophiles are allowed in the communal TV room. No pedophiles are allowed to visit other inmates' cells during the day.
And absolutely no microwaves are allowed in the individual housing units for obvious safety reasons.
But Kiriakou explains that due to constant complaining and sheer laziness from the guards who didn't want to deal with the inmates walking to the cafeteria, the guards eventually capitulated and allowed a microwave to be placed directly in the housing unit, openly breaking their own strict security protocols.
Which sets the stage for a nightmare. One afternoon, a known pedophile was violating the unwritten rules by hanging out in his room during the day, talking incessantly and annoying the other inmates.
Truck, the serial killer, finally reached his breaking point. He calmly walked to the prison commissary, bought a plastic bottle of generic olive oil for $2.85.
He poured it into a plastic bowl, walked over to that illicit microwave, and heated it until the oil was literally boiling. He then walked into the cell and poured the scalding, boiling oil directly onto the sleeping pedophile's face.
The result was catastrophic. The victim suffered horrific burns, had to be immediately medevaced out of the prison by helicopter, and Truck, the serial killer, got an additional 10 years added to his sentence.
Which he didn't care about because he was already never getting out.
But Kiriakou doesn't tell this gruesome story just for shock value. He tells it to prove a vital structural point about the environment Epstein was in. There are rules for absolutely everything in federal prison, and absolutely no one pays attention to them.
The system does not function the way it is supposed to on paper, ever. The guards break the rules, the inmates break the rules, the cameras don't work, the equipment is broken.
So the ultimate argument for Epstein's suicide is that the perfect storm of lazy guards, broken cameras, and ignored suicide watch protocols didn't just magically align the night he died. It happens every single night across the entire federal prison system.
He just took advantage of the structural apathy to end his own life.
It's a compelling argument for incompetence. However, Kiriakou is an intelligence veteran, and he readily acknowledges the very real, glaring arguments for a faked death or a state-sponsored murder.
He points out that if an intelligence agency were going to orchestrate an extraction or silence someone forever, taking the body out on a gurney in full view of the public and the paparazzi is actually a classic textbook intelligence tactic.
Right, because it immediately establishes a visual narrative. You let everyone see the body bag, you let the media snap the photos and report on it, and you cement the reality of his death in the public consciousness before any real questions can be asked or investigations launched.
But the specific detail that gives Kiriakou the most pause, the action that screams cover-up to a guy who spent his life running covert operations, is the immediate cremation of Epstein's body.
By rushing to cremate the remains, the authorities completely eliminate the possibility of a future court order demanding an exhumation.
You prevent independent pathologists from conducting secondary autopsies, and you permanently destroy the ability to do definitive future DNA testing. You permanently seal the physical evidence.
Okay, I hear the incompetence argument, and the story about trucks certainly proves how broken the prisons are, but I have to push back here.
Yeah, please do.
It is one thing for the system to be generally chaotic, and for guards to be lazy. It is another thing entirely for the cameras to glitch, the guards to fall asleep, the cellmate to be inexplicably transferred out, and for the most high-profile, politically explosive prisoner in modern global history, a man holding the secrets of presidents and kings to be left entirely alone, all on the exact same night.
Doesn't the very reality of that systemic incompetence provide the absolute perfect, plausible deniability for a professional hit? If you are a cleaner for an intelligence agency and you know the cameras are always broken and the guards are always asleep, isn't that the ideal tailor-made environment to send someone in?
That is the exact crux of the debate, and you've hit on why it remains unsolved. The incompetence provides the camouflage for the conspiracy. But ultimately, whether he was murdered by an operative secretly extracted to a black site or simply allowed to hang himself through gross criminal negligence, the aftermath reveals the exact same truth about institutional self-preservation.
Kiriakou quotes a famous political maxim here. The cover-up of the crime is always worse than the crime.
He notes that Richard Nixon didn't resign because of the Watergate break-in itself. He resigned because of the sprawling, desperate lies required to cover it up.
And we see that exact same instinct here. The immediate rush to seal the documents, the classification of the flight logs, the rapid cremation of the body.
It shows that massive institutions, whether it's the DOJ, the CIA, or the Bureau of Prisons, when threatened with catastrophic embarrassment or exposure, will always prioritize protecting themselves and their power structures over providing transparency and closure to the public.
They circle the wagons. And that instinct brings us full circle on Kiriakou's entire testimony. We have traced this playbook from the very beginning.
From the CIA handing literal bags of cash to starving Italian journalists in 1949 to buy an election.
To the modern intelligence apparatus threatening independent reporters with a loss of access to kill a story.
To the DOJ fabricating claims of blood on your hands to terrorize a whistleblower like Tom Drake.
To an uncredentialed broker named Epstein weaponizing that exact same psychology to hoard blackmail on the global elite. All the way down to the dark, chaotic, ruleless cell block of a federal prison in Manhattan.
So what does this all mean?
If there is a single unifying through line to everything John Kiriakou has laid out in this transcript, it is that information is the ultimate currency of the modern world.
Whether it is a multi-billion-dollar state intelligence agency shaping the news you read over your morning coffee, or a rogue broker hoarding illicit secrets on a private island, the entity that controls the flow of hidden information controls the geopolitical reality. They are the ones actually drawing the flowchart.
I want to leave everyone with a final thought to mull over, building on everything we've unpacked about this shadow world today. We spend so much of our time, our energy, and our cultural bandwidth looking for the grand mastermind.
We desperately look for the shadowy cabal sitting in a smoke-filled room, pulling all the strings with perfect, engineered, infallible precision.
But what if the most terrifying truth isn't that a secret group is in total omnipotent control? What if the real horror, the thing that should truly keep us up at night, is that the massive institutions we rely on to protect us, to enforce the law, and to preserve the truth are just fundamentally incompetent, chaotic, and broken?
Because it is exactly that systemic incompetence, that blind institutional arrogance that leaves massive, dark power vacuums for the most ruthless predators among us to fill.
Think about that the next time you hear an official cite national security, or the next time you look at a neat, orderly map of global power. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the sources of your daily news, keep looking for the wiring beneath the floorboards, and above all, keep your curiosity sharp.